Thank you and welcome once again to Liquidity in the Markets. I am your host, Syed Hussein, and I am fortunate to have with me today my partner in crime and special guest of the day today, Jitin Jain, our co-founder and CTO of Liquidity Digital. Jitin, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Saeed. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Of course, my man. We I've been waiting for this moment. So do me a favor, Jitin. I guess so for folks that are going to be watching this, the video version of this, I just wanted to Jitin to shift a little bit slightly, move your right shoulder down a little bit, because I wanted to show, just to let people know, when it comes to technology, how crazy this man is with his technology. That when you say that I eat, breathe, and live technology, at least the living part, he certainly does it. But now he's applied technology to his eating as well. So what you're seeing right behind him is a machine, a
Robot.
a robot, a
Robotic.
robot. So we're talking about robotics, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about IoT, all combined into one machine. So in the Indian culture, what we do is we, very similar to how in in the Mexican culture they have tortillas. So we have rotis, and those rotis are made with wheat and oil and water and salt and all these things that I have no idea about. Mr. Jitin over here is actually, he's got a machine that does it for him. So a big shout out to RotiMatic for providing this amazing machine that allows our great CTO to be fed, and to be fed healthy as well. So how do you like it?
Exactly.
How do
And
you like that
especially,
machine, Jitin?
yeah, I love it. Especially in these times when you have to cook everything at home. So yeah, perfect example of automation and robotics and IoT and even cloud also. They put, so all this data goes to their servers, and then they learn how to make better, and they'll also learn how to bring different types of flour into this thing. So yeah, pretty good example of automation.
And
What?
it's a great pragmatic example as well, right? Of how the application of technology could be so beneficial, especially like you said, in these circumstances. So speaking of these crazy circumstances, and for those of you guys who are going to be, who don't have an understanding around the timeline, or will be watching this at a later point in time, we are dead smack in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and all of us are working from our home offices. And one thing I wanted to, it's had a tremendous impact on how work is done. Yet work can't stop getting done. So on that note, Jitin, I'd be curious because you're a pretty wacky doodle guy. I'm always intrigued by how Jitin, his way of thinking, how he works. So Jitin, why don't you talk a little bit about how are you applying the technology, and how are you running, because you're running a global team. How are you running that, and what are some of the tools and technologies that you're utilizing given the current state of where things are?
Yeah, before I start that part, I would love to take this opportunity to thank all our frontline fighters, those health workers who are busting their ass off and putting their lives on the line to save all of us so that we can sit here safely and then uh, basically record podcast or do our own work. So with that, yes, I mean, when it comes to our team culture, thankfully we have always been remote first. In fact, our main guy, Nick Shilov, our engineering manager, he is remote first, and he has been doing great. Now, one thing which I take care of in running a global team is that it's a decentralized or distributed team. But with that decentralized or distributed team, we have at least our tools all centralized or more organized. So focus more on technology tools, how to automate these things, documentation, and all of those things, keeping notes of meetings, keeping them short, running them on a round robin basis. Otherwise, these things get very chaotic. So yeah, I mean, with this in terms of pure productivity wise, it was not a big impact on us. But yes, it has been a very humbling experience how nature can bring down all of us within a day or so. We never could have imagined this would happen. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing, right? I was on the last podcast with Fazan. I was talking to him about, how this is, it gives us a real taste of humility, as to 3 weeks ago, the position that we were in and the sorts of decisions that we were looking to make were drastically different than where we stand 3 weeks after the fact. So it's certainly, they say that things can change at the drop of a dime. We're going through it right now. And yes, to echo your sentiments, Jitin. Yes, thank you very much to all the frontline workers, the real heroes, the real superstars that allow folks like us to not really have to worry about the real chaos that's going on, and allows us to build for the future. But there is no future without the present, and you guys are the reason why the present continues to remain, and you're paving the way for the future for folks like us. So thank you very much. Jitin, it's interesting. When we got started, we were talking about productivity tools, and the tool that we're using right now to shoot this podcast is Zoom. And I was just reading this talks about how quickly people can adjust, or companies have to adjust to changes in the market. So clearly, this pandemic was something that people weren't anticipating, and Zoom as a result, because a lot of teachers are using this, a lot of folks are using what we're doing right now to communicate with each other, and you had folks that were coming into, a lot of it was done through social engineering, but nevertheless, people were coming into rooms that they shouldn't have been into, and as a result of it, it was labeled as a security breach, and and I just noticed that the way that they responded, how quickly they responded to it when we were getting things started right now, as you were coming in. So for those that are watching, the way that Zoom did it is what was before. Anyone that had access to the meeting room or the meeting ID, they could come into it. Now, before you even came in, it actually gave me a notification saying that there's a third party that's trying to get into it. And before I accept, it showed me your profile, so I know who it is. And then only after I allowed it to be admitted, they allowed you to admit. So shout out to Zoom as well, guys. Fantastic job again. Thanks for letting us utilize your tool. And it's folks like you that are also helping out, at least from a technology perspective. And so from that technology perspective, let's talk a little bit, Jitin. I'd love for you to give me your, just share your thoughts on, given the current situation right now, right, of digitization, where are where are you seeing the value of digitization, right? Not just in the capital markets, but even generally across the board, application of newer technologies such as blockchain. Um, Cover that piece, and then also talk to me a little bit about, because I want to get your perspective from someone from within the industry, but then talk to me about the perspective of those that are coming more from traditional industries and don't really even understand the nuances of this technology, and a lot of times there's a misunderstanding. So talk about both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go a little bit back into the history. So around 1970s, when paper trading was the prevalent mode of trading, exchanges, they were forced to close on Wednesdays just to catch up on all the administrative overload. Now 2020, now DTCC, who does trillions of securities settlement weekly, now they have suspended the paper processing because of this pandemic. Now what I believe is that these decisions such as these could be one of the catalytic moments in the digitization of securities. Now, why do we need it? So let's take a simple example. I can send email I can send a Gmail to any email address without ever worrying about whether the recipient is using Yahoo Mail or Hotmail or any companies or any university's email ID. But same is not true for assets. Uh, so in an ideal world, in an ideal technology world, assets will be able to be sent as easily as information, peer-to-peer, near instantaneously at any size. Now this is where I see now we are talking about global financial system. Rewiring that whole global financial system is going to take decades, if not years. So for sure. Now what are the benefits of these digital securities? You have fractionalization, and there are a lot of other post-issuance benefits which we are going to get into as and when we progress in our podcast. And then uh, there are all other risks in financial markets, such as counterparty or default risk, or all those things which can be taken care of using these efficient technology systems.
So when you're talking about the settlement process, for example, right? A lot of folks from that that are coming in outside of the blockchain world and don't really understand the blockchain technology itself. Where would the impact, or more importantly, why or how would the impact of this particular technology, in other words, why blockchain, right? Why distributed ledger technology versus the way that the way that these securities currently work, right? Because a lot of people, a lot of people could come back and say that, look, aren't and I'm going to go back to this and use one of the questions that you had put out there to Jamie, I believe you had put it out to Jamie Finn when you were doing your Wharton
Pen blockchain.
yes,
Yeah.
at your Penn blockchain conference. People would say that currently we already have electronic markets, right? There's already some digital trading that's going on, right? So the concept of digital securities. Why this new technology, and why all the hype behind it, and why now?
Yeah, I mean, so even though we think these securities are already in digital format, I would say they are in analog. So initially they were in physical, now they are in analog, and then what we are progressing toward is a digital format. So what do I mean by analog? So right now there are so many intermediaries. So whenever I buy a share from 3D Ameritrade or any other broker dealer, there are so many intermediaries in between the whole process. You have brokerage firms, you have transfer agents, you have clearing agencies, you have securities exchanges, custody agents, and all those intermediaries, they take a lot of time in their databases to get synced and then do settlement. That's why we have T+2 settlement. Now in a blockchain based system where all these transactions will be settled on one place, on one specific block or couple of specific blocks, then there won't be any T+2 settlement, because there won't be any settlement at all. Everything will be happening on that specific block itself. So that's now when you have these transactions happening on one place, that's when you'll need, either you will need less intermediaries, or whosoever intermediaries we need, their transactional processes will be reduced close to zero. They'll be basically providing their stamp of approval. So let's say when it comes to settlement, now DTCC, I was listening to the DTCC's CEO's podcast. They He was saying that yes, this technology is going to disrupt us. Now either we can get ourselves disrupted, or we can be the pioneers of this technology. So that's why DTCC was one of the very early ones who started a POC on this one, and now they have been working very actively on the digitization of securities. Because ultimately, even if these things are happening on top of blockchain, in the near future, I still see requirement of big financial institutions such as DTCC to put their stamp of approval, or even to maintain that blockchain. There could be private versions of blockchains which could be maintained by these institutions such as DTCC or others. I mean, it's a multivariable equation. You have regulation, you have business, you have finance and technology. All these things are changing every day. I wish I could know the outcome, or what will be the exact weightages of these variables in a final equation. But yes, it's very tough to predict.
So you spoke about, it's interesting, you spoke about instant settlement, right? And how this is going to bring, how this blockchain technology is going to allow us to bring uh, the settlements to, from where we are today to T, which is T plus 2 to really T0. The When it comes to instant settlements, right? There's, and you and I, we've been discussing this. This is a part and parcel of one of your initiatives that you're working on as well. Why don't you talk a little bit about the concept of atomic swaps and where they play into this and how they're going to play into the future of these of the markets, as well as specifically for one of the biggest risks that exists today when it comes to settlement, especially for more advanced securities, things like counterparty risks. How does that alleviate that concern?
Yeah, exactly. So we all know in financial industry that one of the major risk is counterparty risk or default risk. Now, let's say if you're doing any asset swap between you and me, if I send you any asset, and if you don't send me your asset in return, then I'm screwed. Now, what if there is a technology system where this transaction will be atomic? So what do I mean by atomic? Now I'm going into technology uh, details. So atomic transaction will mean either it will happen both ways or it won't happen at all. So if I send it to you, if you don't send your asset back, then I will get my assets back. Now this small feature itself will take care of so many efficiency in this whole system. uh, we can reduce the work of intermediaries, clearing agencies, and all other intermediaries. And one of the ways which we have implemented using this system, or we are implementing we are taking care of this counterparty risk, is by using a feature of atomic transactions on top of Algorand blockchain. So that's another beauty of these upcoming second generation blockchains, that they are building these features which are directly applicable to financial industry. So using Algorand's atomic transaction, we would be able to do these transactions and will be able to take care of this counterparty risk.
So Jitin, you brought up a really interesting point there, right? When you mentioned Algorand, so you're talking about these Gen 2 technologies that are coming on within the blockchain world. For the fellow enthusiasts or those that are curious, can you sort of differentiate between how people should perceive some of the more, and it's funny that we're even using the term generational at this point, given the nascency of this overall market, but nevertheless, it's amazing how quickly everything is accelerating within the space. Can you talk a little bit about some of these Gen 1 sorts of technologies that were there versus the Gen 2? So especially sitting in your seat, right? Because when you're building these applications, when you're thinking about going into this market, what are some of the factors that you're using to sort of qualify whether Gen 1, Gen 2, combination of the two, and what for you are the differentiating factors?
Yeah, so when we talk about blockchain, it was basically started by Bitcoin. Bitcoin was, I mean, there are different viewpoints over here. There is one school of thought which says that, okay, fine, Bitcoin is the only thing, and then rest of the other things are bullshit. But what I subscribe to, the fact is, or the opinion is, that Bitcoin was one of the initial applications of blockchain, that we can say Gen Zero blockchain. And then we had Ethereum, which had smart contracts, and then Algorand came up with other different interesting features. They also had this, they didn't have at all, and they didn't have this scalability problem as well. And then there are other upcoming features in Algorand blockchain. You have atomic transaction, or those co-chains there will be where there will be, like, taking an analogy back from intranet or internet. Similarly, when in Algorand will have, let's say, private chains, public chains, and how they will interact. All these things are very new, but these things are coming up in Algorand, which I'm very excited about.
What are some of the technologies that some of these blockchains that you're particularly excited about?
So For sure, we started building on top of Ethereum because Ethereum had a lot of first mover advantage, and they had some things which other blockchains are yet to adopt. So one of the things which I've been very passionate about is zero knowledge proof. For our listeners, zero knowledge proof, a very good analogy of zero knowledge proof is when we go to a bar and then let's say we have to show to the bar people that, okay, fine, am I allowed to be entered into the bar or not? When they look at my ID, they will basically get to know all of my details, address and all other details, but at the same time they should only know whether I'm allowed to be entered or not. So yes or no, that's the only thing they should know, but they get to know of all other things. Now in a zero knowledge proof system, the way it will happen is I'll put my ID, and then it will give the other party knowledge. It will prove that I have this thing or I'm allowed to enter this bar without giving any knowledge. So proving something by giving zero knowledge or by not giving any knowledge. So going back to zero knowledge proof example, one of the benefits or one of the features of zero knowledge proof, I would say is, so let's take example of this Santander. So what they did, they issued a debt security on top of Ethereum blockchain. Now, uh, I can look into the trading of that security by going into Etherscan. So Etherscan is basically a link where we can put in the smart contract address and it is visible to everyone. Now, in an ideal world, no investment bank or other banks will be comfortable in putting everything out there in public. Now, how do they take care of this problem? So these are very early stages of this technology, but Santander could use our system in the way that they'll be able to complete this transaction. So basically, they issued that bond and then they also bought that bond back. Uh, they they would be able to complete this transaction and at the same time hide things which they want to hide. So basically, making things available to public on a need to know basis, which our system can enable.
Excuse me. How and how would so how would they would then have the ability, for example, it's not an all or nothing, right? So in this instance, they would have the ability to be able to bring in for different groups information that only they're able to, that they should be able to view, and that can all
Exactly.
be automated.
Yeah, exactly. So your privacy is customizable and on a need to know basis. So let's take, I mean, we can take examples of all the digitized funds also. Now, if we take an example of digitized fund, let's say Spice VC, for example, uh, now all of the information around those token holders is out there in public. Anyone can look into Etherscan, put that contract address and see who all are the biggest token holders. Now, if those tokens are issued using our system, then these GPs will be able to hide things from specific LPs who they want to hide them from. So let's say anyone, a small LP also in a Spice VC can see all the things which are being released about this Spice VC token. But using our system, you can hide away things from specific LPs.
And what in your mind, so you mentioned Spice, right? What are, besides Spice, where else are some of the more successful or some of the more prominent digital security offerings or security token offerings that are out there right now?
So I would take examples of, let's divide it into two categories. So first one is, let's talk about traditional institutions who have issued these securities. So one of them is Societe Generale, which issued about 112 million worth of bonds in the form of security token on public Ethereum blockchain, which was very interesting. And on top of that, the most interesting news in most interesting part of that article when I was reading about is Moody's statement. What they said is that because considering the case that this issuance uses blockchain technology and the use of blockchain technology is credit positive for the issuer, in part because of increase transparency and reduce likelihood of errors because there were less intermediaries. So now these traditional institutions have also started realizing the benefits of blockchain and removing or at least lessening the number of intermediaries in this process.
So I'm looking at the time here, and we can clearly you can talk about this stuff until the sun goes down and comes right back up, and then it goes down again. So we'll do more of these. I think one of the things that that we want to start doing is let's start, because there's just so much to this stuff, right? And there's only we've barely even scratched the surface, and even that is an exaggeration. What we should start doing is I'd love to start taking specific topics, like you mentioned zero knowledge proof, you mentioned atomic swaps, right? You mentioned or even protocol specific, right? ZK snarks. I think there's a massive audience out there that is both from your side of the world, and when I say your side of the world, people that are incredibly bright, and then my side of the world, people who are dummies, that you can provide some more clarity around. So I think those are some of the things that we should start doing. And what I would say to the folks that are listening is, if you have specific topics that you want us to talk about, send those in, and we'll we'll start to hone in more and more around that. But I guess one last question that I had for you is, what's cooking with your team right now? What are some of the things that you guys are working on, and what is it that you can talk about? And for those things that you can't talk about, why don't you just give us a little brief sprinkler on it?
Yeah, one of the things which makes me very excited about what we are building is digital syndication. So how can we use either those purpose-built security token blockchains such as Onera or Polymath, or other general purpose blockchains, to automate or digitize those traditional digital syndication processes? Now, whenever we talk to our clients, they get very excited. And I mean, most of our clients, my classmates or alums, also agree that most of the investment banking processes are very transaction based. They are very archaic, and then they need to be automated. So what we are working on is how can we automate these processes by issuing these assets natively on top of blockchain. So that comes under digital syndications. How can we automate due diligence, and then even all those due diligence documents, how can they be basically reduce the work in doing due diligence between multiple parties, and how can we reuse that same due diligence, and then at the same time, who should control those documents or due diligence processes? So all those things, that's what we are working on. And again, as you said, I'm having challenges in basically what to disclose or what not to disclose.
Yeah, be careful, man. Be careful. Even though this is liquidity in the markets, at the end of the day, we are a private business. So there is the concept of competition. So we have to keep certain things very, very close to our chest, and that's always a challenge, right? In an industry that we're looking to build as well, right? How are we able to educate the audience without giving away our secret sauce? So
Liquidity in private markets.
Excellent. All right. Well, Jitin, thank you very much, man. Thank you very much for joining. And you and I, right after this, in about an hour or so, we'll regroup. We've got a couple more meetings coming up, so I'm looking forward to that. But those are more of our on the private side. On the public side, this is what you guys get, guys. Thank you very much. Again, this has been Syed Hussein, and my exceptional partner in crime, the guy that makes me look good.
Feeling is mutual.
Yeah,
that's the only, I would say, disadvantage of this working remotely. We don't get to meet very often. But
that's true. That's true. Even though, don't forget, when this thing got started, right, which was about 3 weeks ago, right? As this thing got started, I was in Africa. I came back from Africa, so we had already told the team not to go into the office, but the insanity hadn't yet started. So this was about 4 weeks ago. So between that time, you and Ion were both camped out at my place. So we were quarantining, guys. We were quarantining. We were absolutely practicing to continue to remain quarantined, except Jitin was in my house. So work never stops. All right, guys. This has been fantastic, Jitin. Thanks again, and we're looking forward to many more of these educational experiences with the great Jitin Jain. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, stay safe.